In this episode, we move into a group of security ideas that are often introduced separately, even though they make the most sense when you hear how they work together. New learners may recognize words like authentication or privacy from everyday technology use, but the deeper value comes from seeing how these ideas connect inside real security decisions. A person claims an identity, proves that identity, receives certain access, performs actions that should be traceable, and handles information that may need privacy protection all along the way. Once you hear those parts as one connected story rather than as isolated definitions, security becomes easier to understand and easier to remember. That matters because entry-level cybersecurity is not only about knowing terms. It is about recognizing how those terms support trust, accountability, and responsible access when people interact with systems, data, and one another in ordinary organizational life. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful starting point is to imagine a simple workplace moment rather than a dramatic cyber incident. Someone wants to sign into a system, open a file, update a record, send a request, or approve a change. Security has to answer several questions at once before that action can be trusted. Who is this person really? Should this person be allowed to do what they are trying to do? Can the organization later tell what happened and who did it? Can the person deny having done it if the action was important? Is personal or sensitive information being handled in a way that respects privacy? These questions lead us directly into Authentication Authorization and Accounting, AAA, along with non-repudiation and privacy. Together, these ideas support a more complete picture of secure behavior because they do not only focus on access. They also focus on trust, responsibility, evidence, and respect for information about real people. Authentication is the part that asks whether a person, device, or service really is what it claims to be. This is often the first door in the process, because before a system decides what someone can do, it needs a basis for believing who that someone is. A beginner may think authentication is just a password check, but the broader idea is about verifying identity claims in a reliable way. The classic way of explaining this involves different kinds of evidence, such as something you know, something you have, or something you are. Even without going deep into tools, the key lesson is simple. Authentication reduces uncertainty about identity. If the system cannot trust the identity claim, everything that follows becomes weaker because access decisions, logging, and accountability all depend on knowing who is actually acting. Good authentication therefore supports the whole chain of trust that follows after the sign and attempt. One of the most common beginner mistakes is confusing authentication with general trustworthiness. Authentication does not mean a person is good, safe, or allowed to do everything. It only means the system has enough confidence about the identity being presented. That distinction matters because people often talk as if signing in successfully proves more than it really does. A valid sign-in only answers one question. It does not answer whether the action is appropriate, whether the access level is too broad, or whether the person's later activity should go unmonitored. Another misunderstanding is assuming authentication is only relevant at the moment of initial access. In practice, identity confidence matters throughout a session, especially when more sensitive actions are performed. This helps beginners understand why authentication is foundational but not complete. It starts the trust process, but security still needs more layers of judgment afterward to decide what should happen next and how those actions should be recorded. Authorization comes after identity is trusted enough to evaluate access rights. This is the part that decides what an authenticated person is allowed to view, use, change, approve, or manage. If authentication answers who are you, authorization answers what are you allowed to do. That difference sounds simple, but it matters enormously because many security failures happen not because identity was unknown, but because access was too broad, too poorly controlled, or mismatched to job responsibility. A beginner should picture authorization as a set of boundaries shaped by role, purpose, and business need rather than by convenience or curiosity. Not everyone who can enter a system should be able to open every record, change every setting, or approve every action. Authorization turns identity into appropriate access, and that is a more disciplined process than simply letting people roam anywhere once they have successfully signed in. This is where a practical example helps. Imagine two employees who both authenticate successfully to the same internal system. One works in human resources, and the other works in facilities management. Authentication may confirm that both individuals are legitimate users, but authorization should still separate what each person can access based on job function. The human resources employee may need to view personnel records, while the facilities employee may need work order information and building maintenance data. If both can see everything merely because both proved who they are, the organization has a problem. That is why beginners must separate identity proof from access entitlement in their minds. Authentication and authorization are closely connected, but they are not the same stage, and they do not solve the same problem. Keeping that distinction clear helps you reason better in security scenarios where the person is real, yet the access requested is still inappropriate. Accounting is the part that records actions so the organization can later understand who did what, when it happened, and sometimes from where or under what conditions. This concept is sometimes overlooked by beginners because it sounds less dramatic than blocking access or stopping an attacker. In reality, accounting is essential because a secure environment needs traceability, not just gatekeeping. If people sign in and perform meaningful actions without reliable records, then the organization loses visibility into behavior, troubleshooting becomes harder, investigations become weaker, and accountability starts to fade. Accounting, therefore, gives the environment memory. It helps the organization answer questions after the fact, such as who accessed a resource, who changed a setting, who approved a transaction, or whether a suspicious event aligns with a legitimate user action. Without that trail, the organization is forced to guess, and guessing is a poor foundation for security, operations, and trust. It is useful to understand that accounting is not only about catching wrongdoing after something bad happens. It is also about supporting normal operations, quality control, and responsible administration. If a system behaves strangely, logs and records can help show whether a recent change may have caused the issue. If an important file was updated incorrectly, traceable activity can help determine whether the change was accidental, authorized, or suspicious. If a business process requires oversight, accounting provides evidence that steps were performed in the correct order by the right people. This broader view matters because beginners sometimes hear accountability language and imagine only punishment. A healthier and more realistic view is that good accounting helps organizations learn, verify, recover, and improve. It supports both security and ordinary business confidence by showing that meaningful actions do not simply disappear into the system without any record of who performed them and under what authority. Non-repudiation adds another layer to this picture by addressing whether a person can later deny performing an action that should be attributable to them. In plain language, this idea is about reducing the ability to say that was not me after an important act has taken place, especially when that act involves approval, submission, agreement, or other meaningful responsibility. A beginner does not need to get lost in advanced technical mechanisms to understand the core idea. The goal is to strengthen confidence that a specific action is genuinely tied to a specific actor in a way that stands up better than a weak or ambiguous record. This matters because some actions are more significant than ordinary activity. Approving a financial transaction, authorizing a change, signing a digital document, or submitting an official request can have real consequences. In those cases, the organization often needs stronger assurance that the action cannot later be denied without serious reason. Non-repudiation depends on the earlier ideas being strong enough to support it. If authentication is weak, then confidence in who acted is weaker from the start. If authorization is loose, then actions may not align clearly with role or entitlement. If accounting is poor, then the record of what happened may be incomplete or unreliable. This is why these concepts are best learned together. Non-repudiation is not a floating concept that works by itself. It grows from stronger identity proof, appropriate access control, and trustworthy records. For beginners, the key insight is that important actions need evidence that is clearer and stronger than casual activity. Security often becomes more rigorous as the significance of the action increases. That principle helps explain why some actions and organizations require extra verification, documented approval, or stronger forms of confirmation. The more meaningful the action, the more the organization needs confidence that it was genuinely performed by the right person and can be defended as such later. Privacy enters this discussion in a way that beginners sometimes miss, because privacy is not identical to security even though the two overlap heavily. Security is concerned with protecting systems and information from improper access, misuse, change, and disruption. Privacy is more specifically concerned with the appropriate handling of personal information and with respecting expectations, obligations, and limits related to that information. In practice, privacy asks questions such as what personal data is being collected, why it is being collected, who should see it, how long it should be kept, and whether its use is appropriate and transparent. This matters because even a well-protected system can still create privacy problems if it gathers too much personal information, uses it for the wrong purpose, or exposes it to people who do not need it. Privacy therefore adds a human-centered lens to the broader security picture by focusing not just on protection, but also on responsible and limited use. A practical way to connect privacy to the earlier concepts is to imagine a system that stores employee or customer information. Authentication helps confirm who is trying to access the system. Authorization determines which users should be able to view or modify which records. Accounting records the access and activity, so actions are traceable. Non-repudiation may support confidence around significant approvals or submissions involving that information. Privacy then asks whether the system is collecting only necessary personal data, limiting access appropriately, using the information for legitimate purposes, and protecting individuals from unnecessary exposure. This is an important lesson for beginners because it shows that privacy is not an extra topic sitting off to the side. It sits inside everyday system use and shapes how personal information should be handled throughout the full life cycle of access, action, and record keeping. When privacy is ignored, systems may still function technically while failing ethically, legally, or organizationally. In practice, these concepts often work like a chain. A user claims an identity and goes through authentication. The system checks what that user is authorized to do. The user performs actions, and accounting records those actions in a meaningful way. For important actions, the organization may require stronger assurance so the user cannot later repudiate what occurred. Throughout that entire chain, privacy considerations shape what personal information is collected, shown, stored, and retained. If any part of this chain is weak, the overall trust picture becomes weaker too. Strong authentication with poor authorization still creates risk. Strong authorization with weak accounting still leaves gaps in visibility. Good accounting without privacy discipline can still mishandle personal data. This chain model is helpful because it gives beginners a mental story to follow. Instead of memorizing 5 separate ideas, they can imagine one secure interaction moving from identity to access, to action, to evidence, while privacy guides how personal information is treated along the way. Many exam-style scenarios for beginners quietly test whether you can tell these ideas apart while also recognizing how they reinforce one another. A question may describe a user who signs incorrectly but still should not access a particular file, which points more toward authorization than authentication. Another may describe a need to track who changed an important record, which points toward accounting and accountability. Another may focus on confidence that a formal approval cannot later be denied, which points toward non-repudiation. Still another may describe personal information being gathered too broadly or shared without need, which points toward privacy concerns even if the system was technically protected. The more clearly you distinguish the purpose of each concept, the easier these questions become. At the same time, the better you see their connections, the less likely you are to treat them as unrelated definitions. That balance between distinction and connection is exactly what practical security thinking requires. As your understanding grows, you start to see that these concepts are really about creating trustworthy participation in digital environments. Organizations need to know who is acting, what they should be allowed to do, what they actually did, whether important acts can be tied to them with confidence, and whether personal information is being handled with restraint and respect. That combination supports not just cybersecurity, but also governance, operational reliability, and public trust. People are more willing to use systems when they believe identity is verified responsibly, access is appropriate, actions are traceable, serious decisions cannot be casually denied, and personal information will not be treated carelessly. For a new learner, that is the bigger picture worth carrying forward. These are not abstract exam words. They are the building blocks of trustworthy digital relationships between users, systems, organizations, and the data that moves among them every day. As we close, remember that authentication, authorization, accounting, non-repudiation, and privacy become much easier to master when you stop studying them as separate islands. Authentication helps establish who is acting. Authorization helps define what that actor should be allowed to do. Accounting helps preserve a record of what happened. Non-repudiation strengthens confidence that important actions cannot be denied casually later. Privacy helps ensure that personal information is handled appropriately and with clear limits. Together, they create a practical model for trust in everyday security operations. That is why these ideas matter so much for beginners. They explain not only how access works, but also how responsibility, evidence, and respectful information handling fit into the same picture. Once that picture becomes clear in your mind, many other security topics start making more sense because you now have a stronger framework for understanding how people should interact with systems and data in a secure and accountable way.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.